Whispers of the blooming shadows. Spring had always been my favorite time of year, the world awakening from its winter slumber, the air alive with the scent of fresh blooms and the promise of new beginnings. But this spring was different. This spring brought with it a nightmare that would haunt me forever. It started innocently enough. I had decided to take a weekend trip to a quaint little town nestled in the countryside, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and immerse myself in the beauty of nature. The town was charming, with its cobblestone streets and quaint cottages, but there was something off about it, something that whispered of secrets lurking beneath the surface. I checked into a bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town, a charming little inn surrounded by fields of wildflowers and towering oak trees. The innkeeper, a kindly old woman with a twinkle in her eye, welcomed me warmly and showed me to my room, a cozy attic space with sloping ceilings and a view of the sprawling countryside. As I settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. I brushed it off as paranoia, attributing it to the unfamiliar surroundings and the late hour, but as the night wore on, the feeling only grew stronger, until it felt like a weight pressing down upon my chest. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the sense of unease that had settled over me like a shroud. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe, taking on sinister shapes that danced along the walls. And then, just as I was on the verge of sleep, I heard the sound of whispers, faint and indistinct, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to make out the words. They were unintelligible at first, mere murmurs in the darkness, but as I listened, they grew louder, more insistent, until they seemed to fill the room. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that there was a rational explanation for the strange occurrences, but deep down, I knew it was something more. There was a darkness in this place, a malevolence that seemed to seep from the very walls themselves. Unable to bear it any longer, I fled from the room, stumbling down the stairs and out into the night. The air was cool and crisp, the stars shining brightly overhead, but even in the light of the full moon, the town seemed to be cloaked in shadows. I wandered the deserted streets, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Everywhere I turned, I saw glimpses of movement in the darkness, heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the night. I was being hunted, I realized, by something that lurked just beyond the edge of my vision. With each passing moment, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they seemed to fill my head with a cacophony of voices, each one crying out for release. I tried to block them out, to focus on finding my way back to the inn, but the darkness seemed to swallow me whole, twisting and turning, until I was hopelessly lost. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, its form shrouded in shadow. It beckoned to me, its voice a siren's call that drew me closer, until I stood before it, trembling with fear. As the figure stepped into the moonlight, I saw its face, a face that was both familiar and foreign, twisted by centuries of torment and despair. It was the innkeeper, I realized, but not as I had seen her before. This was something else, something darker. She spoke then, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. She told me of the town's dark past, of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls, and of the souls that still lingered, trapped between worlds. I tried to flee, to escape the nightmare that had enveloped me, but it was no use. The shadows closed in around me, swallowing me whole, until there was nothing left but darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I awoke in my bed, the sun shining brightly through the window. The whispers nothing but a distant memory. Had it all been a dream, I wondered, or had I truly wandered into the heart of darkness? I may never know the answer, but one thing is certain: I will never forget the springtime nightmare that haunted me in that cursed town, the whispers of the blooming shadows that still echo in the depths of my soul. As I gathered my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. Despite the warmth of the sun streaming through the window, A chill ran down my spine as I recalled the events of the previous night. The whispers, the shadows, the figure in the woods, it all felt too real to be just a dream. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured downstairs to the inn's dining room, where the innkeeper was serving breakfast to the few guests who remained. Her eyes met mine as I entered, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something dark and unreadable behind them. "Good morning," she said. Her voice tinged with an unsettling cheerfulness. "Did you sleep well?" I forced a smile and nodded, trying to ignore the nagging feeling of unease that gnawed at the pit of my stomach. But as I ate my breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every move I made was being scrutinized by unseen eyes. When I finished eating, I approached the innkeeper, hoping to glean some answers from her, but as I opened my mouth to speak, she cut me off with a smile. "Enjoy your stay?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, unsure of how to broach the subject without sounding like a madman, but before I could form the words, a commotion erupted outside, drawing our attention to the window. I rushed outside, my heart pounding in my chest, to find a crowd gathered around the entrance to the inn. At the center of the crowd stood a man, his face twisted in fear and confusion as he recounted a tale of horror and despair. "They're gone," he cried, his voice trembling with emotion. "They're all gone." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what he meant. The other guests, the ones who had been staying at the inn with me, they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty rooms and whispered rumors of the darkness that had consumed them. As the reality of the situation sank in, I knew that I had to leave, to escape the nightmare that had engulfed the town before it was too late. But as I turned to go, I felt a hand on my shoulder, stopping me in my tracks. It was the innkeeper, her eyes filled with a darkness that chilled me to the bone. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice dripping with malice. I tried to pull away, to break free from her grasp, but she held me fast, her grip like iron. And then, with a flicker of movement, she vanished before my eyes, leaving behind nothing but a trail of darkness in her wake. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. What had I stumbled upon in this cursed town? What dark secrets lay hidden beneath its idyllic facade? As I fled from the inn, the whispers of the blooming shadows echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of the nightmare that had consumed me. And as I left the town behind, I vowed never to return, to leave the darkness and the whispers of the forgotten souls where they belonged in the depths of my nightmares. As I hurried away from the inn, the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every shadow seemed to dance with sinister intent, and the whisper of the wind sounded like the murmurs of lost souls. I quickened my pace, my heart hammering in my chest as I navigated the winding streets of the town. But no matter how fast I ran, the feeling of dread only intensified until it felt like the darkness itself was closing in around me. Desperate for escape, I ducked into a narrow alleyway, hoping to lose whatever unseen force was pursuing me. But as I rounded a corner, I came face to face with a figure cloaked in shadows, its features obscured by darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, as the figure stepped forward into the dim light. It was the innkeeper, her eyes gleaming with malice as she loomed over me like a spectre of death. "You cannot escape," she whispered, her voice a chilling echo in the stillness of the night. "You belong to us now." With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and fled, my feet pounding against the cobblestones as I raced through the deserted streets. But no matter how fast I ran, the figure was always there, just out of reach, its presence a constant reminder of the nightmare from which I could not awaken. As I ran, I could feel the darkness closing in around me, enveloping me in its suffocating embrace. I stumbled and fell, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through my body, but I forced myself to my feet and kept running, driven by a primal instinct for survival. At last, I reached the edge of town, the darkness giving way to the pale light of the moon. With one final burst of energy, I pushed myself forward, fleeing into the open countryside with the echoes of the town's whispers still ringing in my ears. As I ran, I could feel the darkness receding behind me, its grasp weakening with every step. But even as I left the cursed town behind, I knew that I would never truly escape its grasp, that the nightmares would follow me wherever I went, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim me as their own. And so, I ran on, driven by fear and desperation, knowing that the springtime nightmare that had consumed me would haunt me forevermore, its whispers echoing in the depths of my soul. The awakening of spring. As the days grew longer and the chill of winter began to fade, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. Spring was finally upon us, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and vibrant life. Little did I know, however, that the awakening of spring would bring forth a nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. It all began on a crisp morning in early April. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the sleepy town where I lived. Excited by the arrival of spring, I decided to take a leisurely stroll through the nearby forest, eager to soak in the beauty of nature's rebirth. As I wandered deeper into the woods, I couldn't help but marvel at the sight of delicate flowers blooming along the forest floor and the gentle hum of insects buzzing in the air. It was a picture-perfect scene, one that filled me with a sense of peace and tranquility. But as the afternoon sun began to wane and shadows lengthened, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere around me. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness, and a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. Ignoring the gnawing feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach, I pressed on, determined to enjoy my time in the forest. However, as I ventured further into the heart of the woods, I began to notice strange anomalies: a tree twisted into grotesque shapes, a clearing devoid of any signs of life, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Brushing off these unsettling occurrences as nothing more than my imagination running wild, I continued my exploration. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the forest, I realized with a growing sense of horror that I had lost my way. Panic gripped me as I stumbled through the dense undergrowth, my heart pounding in my chest. The once familiar trees now seemed to loom over me like malevolent giants, their branches reaching out to ensnare me in their grasp. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows ahead. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was not alone in the forest. Something sinister lurked in the darkness, something ancient and primal, hungering for the taste of human flesh. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, hoping to call for help. But to my horror, I found that I had no signal, leaving me completely cut off from the outside world. Desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding around me, I began to run blindly through the forest, guided only by the dim light of the moon overhead. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadows seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting and shifting with each passing moment. Just as I felt myself on the brink of exhaustion, I stumbled upon a clearing, a small glade bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Relief flooded through me as I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. But my respite was short-lived, for as I looked up, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the night sky. As I watched in horror, the figure began to move towards me, its movement slow and deliberate. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that this was no ordinary creature. It was a manifestation of the forest itself, a twisted reflection of the darkness that lurked within its depths. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as the figure drew closer and closer, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And as it loomed over me, enveloping me in its shadowy embrace, I knew that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. In that moment, I realized that the springtime awakening I had so eagerly anticipated had unleashed a nightmare beyond my wildest dreams, a nightmare from which there was no escape. And as darkness closed in around me, I knew that I was doomed to wander the forest for all eternity, a prisoner of the springtime nightmare that had claimed me as its own. I gasped for air, my lungs burning with each ragged breath as I struggled to comprehend the horror unfolding before me. The figure, cloaked in darkness, reached out with elongated fingers, its touch like ice against my skin. With every fibre of my being screaming for me to flee, I forced myself to my feet and stumbled backwards, my eyes darting wildly around the clearing for any sign of escape. But the forest seemed to have closed in around me, trapping me in its grasp with no way out. As the figure advanced, its features began to blur and distort, shifting and twisting in the moonlight until it resembled a grotesque mockery of a human form. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, fixing me in place with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight into my soul. With a primal scream of terror, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat echoing through the night. Branches clawed at my skin, tearing at my clothes as I plunged deeper into the forest, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and the nightmare that pursued me. But no matter how fast I ran, the darkness seemed to follow, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare me in its grasp. I could hear the creature's unearthly howls echoing through the trees, driving me onwards with a terror beyond comprehension. As I ran, I stumbled upon a narrow path, winding through the trees, a faint glimmer of hope of the suffocating darkness. With renewed determination, I followed the path, each step bringing me closer to the edge of the forest and the safety of the world beyond. But just as I thought I had escaped the nightmare, I felt a sudden pressure closing in around me, squeezing the air from my lungs with a vice-like grip. I glanced back over my shoulder to see the figure looming behind me, its shadowy form blotting out the moonlight as it closed in for the kill. With nowhere left to run, I turned and faced my tormentor, my body trembling with fear as I prepared to meet my fate head-on. But as the creature reached out to claim me, a blinding light pierced the darkness, illuminating the clearing with a brilliance that seemed to banish the shadows for good. And in that moment, the figure recoiled, its form shrinking back into the depths of the forest with a howl of rage and despair. I watched in stunned silence as the light grew brighter, bathing the clearing in its warm embrace and filling me with a sense of peace and serenity. With the nightmare finally vanquished, I collapsed to my knees, tears streaming down my face as I basked in the glow of the newfound dawn. And as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, I knew that I had survived a springtime nightmare trial by fire that had tested my courage and resolve to the very limit. As the figure drew closer, its form became more defined in the moonlight. It was tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with fear and confusion. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I was completely at the mercy of this nightmarish entity that had emerged from the depths of the forest. With trembling hands, I reached for anything I could use as a weapon, a fallen branch, a rock, anything to defend myself against the approaching horror. But my efforts were futile, for I knew deep down that there was no fighting against the darkness that surrounded me. As the figure loomed over me, its shadowy form casting a pall over the clearing, I braced myself for the inevitable. But just as it seemed that all hope was lost, A sudden noise pierced through the silence, a sound that echoed through the forest like a clarion call. The figure paused, its glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, it retreated back into the darkness, disappearing into the depths of the forest. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart still pounding in my chest. Had I imagined the whole thing, or had something or someone intervened on my behalf? With trembling hands, I gathered my wits and began to make my way back through the forest, guided by the soft light of the moon above. Though I knew that the nightmare was far from over, I took solace in the knowledge that I had survived for now. As I emerged from the forest and made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness still lingered, waiting for the opportune moment to strike once again. But for now, I was grateful to be alive, determined to never again venture into the depths of the springtime nightmare that lurked within the heart of the forest.